Muchas gracias, doctor Sarucán. Escucharemos ahora las reflexiones y perspectivas del doctor Walter Reid. Dr. Reid, please, the floor is yours.
Muchas gracias. Lo siento que necesito hablar inglés. Tengo un hijo quien tiene solamente 6 años y él puede hablar español mucho mejor que yo, pero ahora necesito hablar en inglés. Thank you, Professor Sarucán, for your invitation to speak today and for your leadership in preparing this report. Thanks to Julia Carabias for the central role you've played in this assessment and for your leadership on these issues, both here in Mexico and internationally. Thanks to Fernando Tudela for your leadership as well, and to my co-panelists. I'm sincerely honored to be here, to be invited to attend the release of this report and to present some remarks on the release of the report. For the last decade, as was indicated earlier, I've been involved in international, regional, and national assessments of the state of ecosystems and the role that they play in contributing to human well-being. In the course of that, as well as directing the Millennium Assessment, I've read, I've seen, I've been involved in literally dozens of other reports of that nature. And I can say without hesitation that this report, Capital Natural de Mexico, is the most comprehensive, rigorous, and policy-relevant assessment of ecosystems and their contribution to human well-being that has been carried out by any country in the world. It is an outstanding body of work and a model for other countries to follow. The quality of this report is actually not surprising given the extraordinary scientific, the strength of the scientific community here in Mexico, the extensive network of expertise that exists, the presence of institutions like CONABIO that have played such an important role in mobilizing the data and information on the nation's biodiversity and mobilizing that and making it available for the society. But having directed the Millennium Assessment, I'm also keenly aware of the logistical and operational challenges of doing something of this magnitude and this scale. The credibility and the ultimate impact of a report like this rests fundamentally on the rigor and the quality of the science. And to get that rigor and quality requires getting the very best scientists, involving them in a thorough process of discussion and ultimately peer review of the findings, and that can be enormously challenging. In English, we refer to the process of trying to do that as trying to herd cats. I congratulate Jose Sarucán in particular and the staff that was involved in doing this for this amazing achievement. And just as important, I congratulate the scientific community here in Mexico and the many, many authors and reviewers that contributed their data, the expertise they have, and their knowledge to this effort. I'm sure that much of the reason why so much effort has gone into this report is that the authors realize that this is truly a defining moment in the history of Mexico with respect to the future of the nation's biodiversity, ecosystems, and their contribution to the nation's development. This report presents a rigorously documented case for what I would consider to be a profound and fundamental shift in how Mexico should view and manage its ecosystems. In my view, Capital Natural de Mexico is the most important report on Mexico's biodiversity and ecosystems that has ever been written, and if it succeeds in what it sets out to do, it may well be seen as the most important report that has ever been written, ever, for Mexico in the future. The reason for this is that this report and the information it provides should catalyze this fundamental transition in how ecosystems are managed in Mexico. Mexico, as well as the planet, is at a watershed moment. It can go on the one hand, treating its ecosystems in a business-as-usual fashion, something where we treat ecosystems to be exploited for short-term needs. Or on the other hand, it can change course and begin to treat its ecosystems as fundamental assets for development and human well-being. It can begin to invest in its natural capital just as it invests in social capital through investments in education and in its physical capital through investments in technology and infrastructure. This report documents the risks of continuing down the business-as-usual path and the opportunities of beginning to treat these ecosystems as true assets and it identifies the steps that could be taken to make that possible. The issues that Mexico is confronting are not unique by any means. It's a defining moment in history for Mexico, but this is also a defining moment in the history of the planet. The Millennium Assessment that was released in 2005 provided the global overview of the same types of trends and issues that Mexico is confronting now. Throughout history, people have treated ecosystems and biodiversity as resources to be exploited for food and fiber, often unsustainably, and they viewed conservation as a barrier to development. We've taken for granted the free ecosystem services such as storm protection, protection of water supplies, water purification, and pollination. When our populations were relatively small on the planet and ecosystems were relatively large, this was actually an economically rational thing to do. Exploiting those ecosystems didn't have that many costs, external costs to human society. But over the last 50 years, that has changed dramatically. Over the last 50 years, we've basically re-engineered the planet. Population has grown doubled in that time period. Economic activity has grown sixfold, and that has increased the pressure on the planet to an enormous extent. And at a global level, the changes to ecosystems are truly profound. In just the 30 years near the end of the last century, we converted more of the planet's ecosystems to agriculture than in the entire 200 years of the agricultural revolution in the 1700s and 1800s. We've now built so many dams that 5 times as much water is stored in reservoirs as exists in free-flowing rivers. Since 1985, we've introduced more nitrogen into the planet in the form of fertilizers than in all the history of humankind before that. The rate of species extinction now may be as high as 1,000 times the background rate of extinction, and of course greenhouse gases are at the highest level in the atmosphere that they've been in nearly 500,000 years. Now, for centuries, we obviously benefited from these changes, obviously the growth of agriculture, and the costs were relatively small. But last century, that changed. The costs associated with environmental degradation are now greater and growing greater than the benefits that we're receiving from continued conversion of these ecosystems. In the Millennium Assessment, we examined the status of some 24 global ecosystem services, and we found that 2/3 of those services are being significantly degraded. This includes degradation of fisheries, the diminished ability of ecosystems to purify water, protect us from storms and floods, regulate air quality, regulate the climate, and even loss of many of the spiritual and cultural values of ecosystems. It's clearly time to rethink the role of ecosystems in development. For too long, we've viewed our ecosystems as providing inexhaustible resources for our use. For too long, we've assumed that free environmental services like pollination, water purification, and climate regulation are also inexhaustible. And for too long, we've assumed that efforts to protect our ecosystems are barriers to economic development. Capital Natural de Mexico shows how wrong these assumptions are. The degradation of Mexico's natural resources and environmental services is a growing cost to the nation's development. And this report shows that by investing in conservation and enhancement of environmental services, Mexico will be investing in its future just as through investing in education, health, and infrastructure. Jose Saracan and I and many of the others in this room that were involved in the Millennium Assessment came from that process knowing that the challenges were enormous, but it wasn't clear what exactly to do about that. What this report, what this study has done for one of the most biologically important countries on the planet is to show what's happening to biodiversity and ecosystems, what the implications are for development, and what is needed to address those challenges. I do believe this is one of the most important reports that I've seen for any country on this topic, and I think it will also provide a model for other countries in the future to follow as they try to manage their ecosystems better. Thank you.